Hello and welcome back to Sinister. My name is Rosie and today I'm joined with my boyfriend Paul.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul. You might have heard from previous podcasts. I'm the short drunken petty. But we're not all tired with the one brush. But back to this, I am very excited to be on a podcast here with Rosie.
Thank you. Okay, whatever. So, since I have been missing Australia a little bit lately, I thought I would tell you about a case from a town called Wollongong in Australia. So, this one takes place in 1998, and we're actually going to be discussing two connected killers in this episode. So, these people committed two separate crimes, but they're connected, and I thought this would be perfect to tie it all together in one episode. But as usual, I'm giving a trigger warning because these are some pretty gruesome crimes with child abuse and child sexual abuse allegations also discussed throughout. But all the actual crimes taking place that we're discussing are on adults.
And which part of the country world is this podcast taking place?
Oh, did I completely miss that? So this one's taking place in Wollongong, Australia. Have you heard of it?
I spent a bit of time in Wollongong. With you even.
We have. And we have spent time there. So, let's get started on the 1998 Wollongong Murders with a man named David O'Hearn. So David was 6 years old.
Sorry, has he Irish connections? Because Ahern is Irish name.
I was actually thinking that as well. Because not many people have the apostrophe in their names.
No, it would be a popular Irish name.
Is it? So David was 6 years old in 1998 and said to be a quiet person who kept to himself a lot, but was a very kind and thoughtful person, said to be the very generous, friendly face of the convenience store he owned in Dapto. David was known for being the kind of store owner that was always willing to help others and would give items away for people he believed needed them. He wasn't a person anyone could hate, he had a good heart. Now, David was known for his early openings, so on Saturday the 13th of June 1998, when David's shop remained closed beyond the normal hours, his family became concerned. Now, as David lived alone, there wasn't anyone else they could check in with, so they went to check on him themselves. So they went to his home in Albion Park, which is a suburb of Wollongong.
I think I was in Albion Park. Was that where the Buddha turned up after the last storm?
That was Buller. That was the opposite direction. They went to his home in Albion Park, a suburb of Wollongong, and when David didn't answer the door, they let themselves in, walking into the most horrific scene. David was laying on the ground dead. His head had been completely separated from his body and could not be seen in that room. His hand had been cut off and put on a lounge. His jeans had been pulled down to his knees, exposing his mutilated genitals. He had been partially disemboweled, with his intestines having been displayed on a silver tray in the living room.
Someone definitely had a bad grudge against him.
Yeah. And there were several satanic drawings in blood on the walls. Satan was written on a mirror and a wall. There was a pentagram and also an inverted cross. So that's the scene his own family had to walk into.
Not nice.
So police were called to examine the crime scene. The family didn't go further in the house. Police then discovered David's head in the kitchen sink that had been repeatedly beaten in the back, which implies that it was a surprise attack while David had his back to the killer. And they found that the writing on the walls had actually been written with David's hand that had been cut off, and there were also a number of cuts made on his body. They found 4 knives, a small metal saw, a razor blade, and a corkscrew surrounding David's body, and all had David's blood on them. They also found a crystal decanter that appeared to be what David's head wounds were from. Each of these weapons appeared to have belonged to David, making police believe the killer arrived at his house unarmed.
Basically using David's own utensils.
Yeah, he used all of David's own belongings.
Like, was he not going in the intention of not killing when he'd want to bring his own weapons? Or
I think that's what actually kind of scares me the most.
I'm just saying they mightn't be going with the intention to kill if they didn't bring weapons with them.
Maybe. We'll get into that.
Okay, sorry. I'll stay quiet here in the corner.
That's not what you're here for.
Okay.
So, the injuries were so severe that a specific cause of death could not initially be determined. However, the head injuries and skull fracture from the bloodied wine decanter were considered the most likely cause. Many seasoned police and homicide detectives were shocked by the scene they witnessed, with some even saying they'd never encountered anything like it in all their years with the police force. The crime scene was so horrific, they couldn't even begin to guess the order that the events had taken place. So upstairs, drawers had been ransacked throughout the house, but the injuries appeared too horrific to have been for a robbery or to torture information out of David for his possessions. So they ruled out a robbery as a motive very quickly. They determined that this crime had been taken out by someone with a lot of anger and appeared more personal, like you said. So further investigation found that most injuries were sustained post-mortem, so David wasn't actually tortured.
He was murdered first.
He was murdered first, and then the corkscrew and the little knives and all that were used. Which kind of makes me feel a bit better, because to be tortured first would be very horrific. So there was evidence and fingerprints left at the crime scene on the decanter, but there was no link in the police database. So whoever had done this had not come under police notice before, but there was no fingerprints left on any of the other weapons or anywhere else in the house. So, meaning there was someone capable of such a crime out there, brutal crime, who had not been caught doing anything else, even minor, prior to this event. So they kind of went 0 to 100 committing a crime. And they were clearly dangerous given the nature. So David's garage led straight into his house, and his car was found parked into the garage with the roller door closed, but groceries he'd purchased the night before still in the car. And there were no signs of forced entry. This led detectives to believe it was possible that David knew the killer and let them in, or the killer found an unlocked door. It would have also been shortly after he pulled into the driveway, as he had no time to unpack the groceries. The receipt on the groceries said he'd purchased them in Dapto around 5:30, so assuming he went directly home, he would have met the killer just before 6 p.m. Now, there were rumours that David was gay, which his family have all denied. However, his sister thought he could have been, but would have been quiet about it. So police began questioning if this was a homosexual hate crime, which might also explain the mutilated genitals and the type of sexual anger towards him. However, the main thing they were focused on in the beginning were the satanic symbols on the walls, which they thought could be linked to a type of satanic ritual or satanic activities. So they were also on the search for people in the area that had an interest in the satanic cult.
And would that be a big thing in Wollongong? Satan followers.
I actually don't know if Wollongong's a higher rate than normal, but I mean, I guess realistically, Wollongong isn't a place where I think I'd see a lot of that.
Well, I suppose when it's the detective's first time witnessing anything like this, it's probably when it's a once off.
Yeah, we will get into this, but they basically only had one lead on a person with satanic leanings, so perhaps it's not very big. So anyway, that's when they found out about a man named Keith Schreiber, who lived a few houses down from David and had satanic leanings.
There's always one.
But when they went to Keith's home, he wasn't there, he was at work. But they spoke to his roommate, a 19-year-old named Mark Valera. Now, Mark was described as being calm and polite to police and told them to come in and allow them to go through Keith's bedroom without causing a fuss. While looking through Keith's possessions, they found a number of sketches of satanic drawings, which were noted as being consistent with the crime scene of David's murder. These pictures had mutilated, headless bodies and disemboweled bodies, as well as some satanic imagery. Keith became a strong suspect, and they believe he had to have some connection to the murder.
Just because of a few drawings.
The drawings, though, did have a lot to do with the crime scene, like disembowelment, mutilation. I feel like that's not a regular thing in murder.
But still, you just can't make a suspect out of a person just for a few drawings that he has in his room. And plus, they didn't have a warrant.
That's true too. I know they didn't, but like I said, the roommate very willingly let them into the house. No issue, very polite, go through Keith's belongings.
But if your roommate, what you thought was into satanic activity, would you be actually your roommate? Would you live in the same premises in it?
I believe the roommate also enjoyed the occult.
I reckon he was part and...
I reckon he enjoyed a bit of the satanic stuff as well. Yeah. So I think if you like satanic stuff, and your roommate also likes satanic stuff, that's a match made in heaven. If you were not into satanic stuff and your roommate loved it, I'd let the police into my house personally.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah. So, because Keith wasn't home, they went to his work. Keith worked at a fish market as a filleter.
That's handy.
So they got there and he's slicing up a fish. So from interviews, it seems like that only made them more suspicious about him because clearly he can use a knife.
Well, you wouldn't have a job in a fishmonger's if you couldn't use a knife.
A fish what?
Fishmongers.
Mongers?
What do you call it?
A fish market.
Yeah, but you got fishmongers.
Mongers. What's a monger?
Like a fish butcher.
But Keith had an alibi. So he was staying at his employer's home, sleeping on the floor that night as they had to get up to go to Sydney fish markets the next morning, really early. This was then confirmed by Keith's employer when the employer and Keith's roommate Mark both gave supporting evidence at the station, and Keith was ruled out as a suspect in David's murder. So you're right. They couldn't just blame him because there was satanic cult linking stuff. Police then struggled with further leads. It was only 2 weeks after David's murder, on the 26th of June, that another murder occurred in the Wollongong area that had many similarities to David's murder. This was former Wollongong Mayor and former member of the New South Wales State Parliament, 67-year-old Frank Arkell. So due to the similarities in the crime, the team that were investigating David's murder took on the investigation of this case as well. So Frank had a house, but behind his house he had a granny flat, which he appeared to have spent a lot of time in, more so than the main house. I'm not sure if it was like a sex place for him in the back or what, like, but he seemed to be using that as more of like a...
He's on kinky little gaff.
Yeah, it seemed like that, yeah.
Was Frank married?
No, Frank was not married. But Frank was found in his granny flat. So looking into it from the front door, there was a bed directly ahead, and then Frank was found on the opposite side of the bed on the floor, covered in so much blood that they couldn't identify him. He had suffered substantial injuries to his head, and there was a broken lampshade next to his body, where it was described that the ferocity of the crime had broken the lampshade. So he had that lamp's cord also wrapped around his neck, so cause of death was either the strangulation or the head trauma. There was over 40 injuries in total on Frank's body.
But he wasn't as mutilated as David. There weren't body parts of him all over the house.
No, he wasn't dismembered.
It wasn't like a Satan.
There was no satanic imagery at this crime scene. So there are differences, but not enough for it to be two different people. So like David's murder, the killer had used whatever was on hand to kill him, not bringing weapons into the house. And the pattern of injuries was similar. Head injuries used by things already in their homes and post-death mutilation. So there was a little bit of post-death mutilation, but no dismembering. Frank, however, had 3 tie pins in his face, one deeply in his cheek, and the other 2 had been inserted in each of his eyes, or post-mortem.
But are you saying so that these 2 men that been murdered might be gay? And that the murderer was luring them in?
There may be some of that.
That seems like there's no force entries or...
Yeah, how'd you know that the second one might have been gay?
Well, if it's the same murderer.
Oh!
I know there's no court case yet, but...
Good linking! So, detectives found a plastic lunchbox full of tie pins in Frank's wardrobe of his main house. They took that and the glass sliding door off the granny flat for fingerprint analysis. Again, the prints didn't match anything in the police database, but they also didn't match the prints found on the decanter at David's home. So they weren't even matching the prints at the initial crime scene. However, that can also just mean that they came from different parts of the hand, and that's not to rule out that they could not have come from the same person.
Well, it mightn't be just one murderer.
Might not be either. The cases seem too similar, though, to police to have been done by different people. Plus, there wouldn't have been enough information leaked by the media at the time for it to be a copycat killer. So the police were sure at this time that those murders had to be linked to the same person.
Or persons.
Now, at this time, Frank had ongoing child sexual abuse allegations he was attempting to fight in court. So this was the mayor of Wollongong at one time. So Frank had been mentioned in the Wood Royal Commission's report, which I'm not super knowledgeable about, but I believe it was an investigation to determine the existence and extent of corruption within the New South Wales police force in the 90s. So it was looking into potential police cover-ups, which included cases of organised pedophilia networks being covered up, and Frank Arkell had been linked to these child pornography and pedophilia scandals in the years leading up to his death.
Well, that seems to be a common thing now in the world, isn't it?
What's that? Covering up?
The more cover up, the higher up the hierarchy. Seem to be more people that are involved in this paedophilia crimes.
I'd say Frank's links to Parliament really helped cover up everything that he did do, or was accused of doing, with allegations.
That's down to the hierarchy, and they can call these shots. Especially like it's fucking Jimmy Savile, who fucking like sure how many court cases or judges and things were in fucking bed with him, like, and
Crazy, isn't it? No,
fucking this new fucking BBC for the what are you out there a couple of weeks ago?
What, really?
Head for the BBC.
Stop it. I didn't hear about that one.
I presume, as far as I can believe, that it was his wife reported him.
Stop it. So Frank had been acquitted of child sex offences 6 months before his murder, but investigations were continuing with further charges to be laid. It was common knowledge and reported in the media that more allegations had been made about him, as he had been arrested and charged with 29 sex offences involving men and boys. He was due to stand trial again in September that year. Due to the brutal nature of this crime and previous allegations, investigators interviewed a number of his victims or people who had made police reports about Frank, as they believed this needed to be a type of revenge kill, which it would appear to be. Each of his victims that were interviewed had solid alibis, and it didn't appear to have possibly been any of them.
But it could be a victim that never went to the police about, because what was the point in the victim going to the police if it was going to be covered up in it?
Well, that's it too, and given how many it appeared...
Take the law into his own hands.
It appeared to me in the media that it was happening a lot with him getting away with it too. He'd just gotten away with a load of it 6 months prior to this. He was going again for new charges.
Well, yeah, and the law was not going to help you.
Clearly.
Victim might just have taken the law into his own hands.
Yeah, that would be exactly right.
I'm fucking stick to clues right here. This kid started nothing.
So, they thought it must have been a thrill kill or something, but they still attempted linking the two men. The only link being that they were both believed to be gay. Then the media dangerously and recklessly started trying to link David to the same crimes that Frank was supposed to be facing in court, and started accusing the two of being involved in a child sex network. Frank had already been accused of drugging young men and forcing them to have sex with him. Now reporters were saying things like, it's believed he was well acquainted with 60-year-old David, none of which was based on anything slightly factual and just more media trying to ruin grieving families' lives. They were just grasping at straws trying to get a story out.
But your David had no cases pinned against him, did he?
Nothing.
He was just your local friendly shop owner.
But now media's going, we know they were known to be in the same group, which they did not.
Fake news.
Fake news. So police couldn't find anything to prove this, with all their extensive background checks into David, which they'd done trying to work out who might have wanted to hurt him. Never found anything, and they've ruled out all pedophile claims. So they believed this could have just been someone either targeting gay men or just a coincidence that two targets of some new serial killer were gay men. Mind you, I don't believe David being gay was ever confirmed by anyone that actually knew for a fact he was. So this was just speculation, rumours. I know it was the 90s. Maybe he was in the closet, but it was never actually confirmed. He never came out. No previous partners ever came out.
Not as open back in the 90s in Australia. Or was it the same as every other country?
Yeah, I feel like it was the same as every other country. Like, think about the Scott Armadale case. And it was 95, so it was only a couple of years before this. And someone got murdered.
But that was in America, wasn't it?
It was in America. But putting someone...
I listened to that podcast.
I know you could. Yeah, look, I'd say there was still a lot of people in the closet. I mean, 2024 now, and I'd say there's still a load of people in the closet in Australia.
Yeah, I suppose, look, it's family, parents, grandparents, still living the old days.
That's the thing. So then they attempted linking these murders to other unsolved murders of known gay men and found a murder in Glebe, Sydney, which is kind of near Bondi. It's like 80 kilometres out of Wollongong.
It was there too.
You were there too. You've toured all of Australia. So... the Glebe murder had happened in 1997, which was 6 months prior to David's murder. They found that a man named Trevor Parkin had been beaten in the back of his head with a bowling ball, stabbed and partially disemboweled. He also had post-mortem mutilation. So there were a lot of similarities between that one and the other two crimes in Wollongong. They had also found belongings of Trevor's at Waterfall train station, which is a station that you would stop at travelling between Glebe and Wollongong. However, later, a 17-year-old boy named Christopher Robinson ended up confessing to this murder, and it ended up having nothing to do with David and Frank's murders. So this was a link for quite a while. But Trevor Parkins was also in pedophile rings.
I suppose, like, Sydney is a lot bigger area than Wollongong.
It is.
Plus, like, Wollongong is a good bit out of Sydney.
It is. I feel like it's quite out of the way. You're not going to go into Sydney to commit a crime and then come back to Wollongong.
Well, no.
Or vice versa.
Well, we're not going to go into Sydney just looking for a gay men to go killing.
No.
Murdering.
Well,
mauling,
you'd think no.
mutilating. Look, this is what happens. It's a bit gruesome, but you look, but if you were going to go on a revenge, you'd do it while the person's still alive.
You would. So you're still adamant that this is a revenge?
It's, I don't know, it's more into the case. It looked like it was at the start, like, but if you say it's Satan followers that are doing this, like, you think there'd be a lot more of these murders?
Yeah.
Wollongong is a big area that there would be a lot more than two gay men there.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Wollongong is a massive place. So given that they ended up falling short on leads with that one, and that was not linked to the Wollongong cases, they had to continue to follow other leads from Frank's murder. They had found a pair of blood-stained Nike tracksuit pants at Frank's home, which appeared to have been taken off in a hurry, because they were inside out and thrown on the floor, and a pair of Colorado boots. I don't know if you know the Colorado boots. They were like a men's fashion work boot type thing. You know, like Timberlands?
They were kind of the cow-skin boots, cowboy boots.
Kind of like that. It's like in between cowboy boots and like worker boots, though, but they were like fashionable. But Frank was a suit and tie kind of man, so they were not his clothes. Plus, the boots were a size 9.5 and Frank wore a size 7. So, not his shoes. And there were also clothing items of Frank's that were now missing and thought to have been taken by the killer. So if they found a suspect, they were hoping to find Frank's clothes in their possession. So they followed the boots back to the manufacturers, and they were able to look at the batch number and where they would have sold that particular boot. They found the shop in Wollongong that batch would have gone to and got all their bank records of sale. But there were only 6 people who made car sales, and those 6 all still had the boots in their possession. Some of the men even answered their doors wearing them. So all 6 were eliminated, and they came to another dead end, as the killer must have made the purchase in cash. They decided to post photos of the pants and boots in news articles, hoping for someone who had either seen someone dressed that way in the area or knowing of someone who was clothes like that to come forward.
And these were a popular boots at the time?
These were a popular boot at the time, plus Nike tracksuits.
It's a needle in a haystack poster.
You would think, wouldn't you? While a call didn't go in about the clothing that night, one went in about a car a neighbour saw leaving Frank's home the night of the murder. It was a red Nissan Skyline coming out of the driveway around 3 a.m. Now, Nissan Skylines are like the Australian car. So they're not made anymore, but back in the day, every Australian had to have that car, especially the teenagers, the boys.
You don't use them, they're here to close a gate or something, block a gap.
Did you ever have the Skyline?
No, we've been to the Honda Civic in this country.
I've seen that. So they found a car smashed up and stripped in bushland in Mount Ousley, north of Wollongong, on the 2nd of August. This was also Nissan Skyline. Skyline. They tracked down the man who had made the Crime Stoppers report and hypnotised him, with his consent obviously, to remember the night better. They wanted him to remember the registration number, identifying marks, how many people in the car, what way the car left, all that sort of stuff. So
he was a psychic?
Not a psychic, hypnotising.
That's a difference. How is that going to come up in court?
Hypnotising, I think hypnotising someone is proven and it's allowed to find extra information. So anyway, this guy, after being hypnotised, was able to say that the red car definitely came out of Frank's home driveway. It was definitely a red Nissan Skyline, and it was a male in his 20s, and was able to give a description to a sketch artist who was able to come up with a sketch of...
To sketch it using as hypnotist.
I think it is, but this ended up coming up empty anyway. So thankfully, they received a phone call from an ex-girlfriend who said her old boyfriend, Mark Van Krevel, used to regularly wear a similar Nike tracksuit with the same Colorado boots.
Ooh, now we're getting places. Just because they just split up now, she's had to accuse your boyfriend.
So they were together up until she noticed these items missing. So she said she doesn't see him wearing these clothes anymore and they've disappeared from his house. She said when she brought it up with him, he became agitated and refused to talk to her about it. She said that he'd also started taking a particular interest in murders and was keeping newspaper clippings on the murders. That's when she left him and she called Crime Stoppers.
Yeah, look, she could have been taking the clippings herself and setting up her boyfriend for...
I also don't think the keeping newspaper clippings is that odd, personally.
I wouldn't say it. Sure, like, you use clippings and articles for finding your stuff in these cases.
Yeah, and I think it's not cool, but I do find crimes interesting. And I think had I been older at the time, not one, I would have probably been very up to date with the cases and stuff happening, especially so close to home. So I don't think the keeping that part is weird. Even him having similar Nike tracksuit and the Colorado boots, I don't think that's weird until it gets to the point that she asks him about him and he becomes agitated and refuses to talk about it. I think that's where it gets a bit like, oh, that's suspicious.
Yeah, I lost my boot and pants.
Well, no, like, if he had just gone, oh, I actually haven't seen them in a while, or was, like, a bit more calm about it, but they were found at the crime scene and he became agitated just as a bit of a giveaway. But that wasn't enough to arrest Mark.
I should hope not.
So police still felt the need to protect the community, so they started watching him. And this was when investigators realised they'd met Mark before. Do you remember when we met Mark? Mark Van Krevel had now changed his name to Mark Valera, and he was Keith's roommate that allowed the police into Keith's bedroom while investigating the David O'Hearn case. He had also gone into a police station to provide an alibi for his friend Keith. This was the one that they found very polite and welcoming.
And they left. This is the fellow that left them into
Keith's bedroom.
Keith's bedroom without any warrants and...
Yeah.
Alright.
Interesting, isn't it?
Okay, alright. We're kind of getting places.
So while watching Mark, he was regularly seen in the company of Keith. Apparently, along with being roommates, Keith and Mark had been childhood friends, which started with their mutual interest in the occult and an obsession with death and books on murder. That part's fine. What I'm not so sure is fine, and this could be rumour, we can't actually prove this part, but apparently years before, the two would supposedly discuss the best ways to dissect a body and how to keep a person alive while torturing them. That's where things get
don't bang them in the head first, you know?
Well, that's it too.
They did not do their research properly, like. And normally, if they're after researching into how to mutilate bodies, why do they have their own knives? Why are they using household utensils from their victims? Well, then again, look, we're not saying they're the murderers. We haven't got to that part yet.
No, we're not saying they're the murderers, but it is also interesting that someone with such an interest in dismembering bodies and things like that would not have their own weapons that they would prefer to use. I do find that part interesting. Just going into a house and hoping that they have something good enough to do the job is odd.
Would not normally would normal people have that behaviour? Would they not practice on animals and things first?
Well, that's supposed to be the MO of like a psychopath and stuff.
That's kind of their leading on that pattern, aren't
Yeah, so there was nothing from either of their past that indicated that either of them did anything to animals. But usually that is their MO. But like I said, neither of them were known to police. It was like a 0 to 100 situation, what it appeared to be anyway. So when Mark had gone to the station with an alibi for Keith, police typed up his statement and printed off his interview notes for Mark to sign the paper copy. Remembering this, they decided to examine the paperwork for his DNA and found the fingerprints on the paperwork matched those found on the decanter at David O'Hearn's home. However,
was Mark not? Did they not know that he's two different names? Do they not know that he's the same person?
No, so his girlfriend had known him as Mark Van Krevel, and he had only just recently changed his last name to Valera just before this kind of occurred, or around the time that this was occurring.
And when he gave an alibi for his friend Keith, what name the hell he used?
I believe he was using Mark Valera, which is why police weren't sure who Mark Van Krevel was when the girlfriend initially said it was her boyfriend, Mark Van Krevel, that was the pants.
Is it that easy to change your name in Australia? Do you not have ID or anything? Driving license, passport?
Yep, and so he'd done all the legal paperwork to change his name. His name had legally been changed. So I don't know if people from his past just weren't aware that his name had changed. But when police arrived at his door, I believe they knew him as Mark Valera.
Was he after getting married?
No. But there is a reason he did change his name, which I will get into. You're asking a lot of really good questions, actually. You're going to give everything away, but I'm excited that you're listening.
Of course, that's what I'm on this podcast for.
I know. No, but you are actually asking all the right questions, but you're just going to give everything away.
Oh, sorry, am I jumping forward?
Yeah, but no, it's great. I love it. Police still wanted further evidence. I'm not sure why, but they did want further evidence before arresting to ensure this case against Mark couldn't be thrown out of court. So they continued following him and watched him throw out a bottle of Coke, collected a fingerprint analysis, and the prints matched those found at both crime scenes as well as the interview paperwork.
Can they use that as fingerprints?
That they found?
Do not have to get permission from
Warrant
the person.
and stuff?
From the person to fingerprint.
And this is what they found, so I don't know if they were allowed to use this as evidence.
Like they have that a weird way of finding stuff. Wouldn't that just asking for fingerprint?
I suppose at the time this was allowed because it's what they used.
It is, but you like that Coke bottle big down to
anyone. That's what I was thinking. They could have pulled out a Coke bottle. There could have been the wrong Coke bottle. There could have been 10 other Coke bottles in that bin. I was thinking this exactly.
Yeah, I thought it's just a weird way of going about things.
It is odd, and it's odd to me that they didn't want to use paperwork with his signed name on it and also a handprint, but they were willing to use a Coke bottle that they found out of the bin.
Was he in for questioning?
No.
No, he wasn't a suspect at this stage.
No, he was a suspect. They just wanted more information before they brought him in.
Yeah, but say once you bring in a suspect, imagine the first thing that they would do was fingerprint him.
Either way, all of this was enough for police to make a plan to arrest Mark for both murders, but they didn't get the chance.
Ooh.
Mark went off to Taekwondo, as he had done for a while, and ended up telling his instructor, Rodney Day, that he wanted to talk to him before class started, but didn't want to be removed from training. He then confessed to both of the murders of David O'Hearn and Frank Arkell. Rodney told Mark to get changed, calling for someone else to take over the class as he wanted to get Mark away from that environment, and his students, I'm assuming. Rodney was hoping it wasn't true, but in case it was, he needed Mark away from the class. Mark refused to let Rodney take him to police, so Rodney decided to take him to a coffee shop near the Wollongong police station. He tried getting through to Mark and talking to him about what had happened without getting him fired up, as now suddenly he's finding out that Mark is capable of murder, but he's still trying to encourage Mark to go to the police, telling him that's the right thing to do. He was hoping by being at a coffee shop so close to the police station he could kind of coerce him over. But Mark did finally agree to have Rodney take him to the police station, but wanted Rodney to take him back to his unit first, and asked him to mind a knife and sword of his. Mark went into the unit while Rodney opened up the boot of his car and stood far back, now concerned for his own safety. Mark walked out with the items, assuring Rodney he wouldn't hurt him, but Rodney just told him to put them in the boot and shut it, not wanting to get close to Mark while he had the weapons.
Surprising enough.
Yeah, but kind of understanding. And it doesn't say how long he was Mark's Taekwondo instructor, but thinking you know someone for so long and then all of a sudden they're holding a weapon and you're scared, and it's wild, isn't it?
It is, but these are not weapons that he would have used at any of the murders.
No, but he had access to knives and a sword. Also, who owns a sword?
Mark.
Rodney drove Mark to Wollongong police station, where he asked the front desk to speak to someone in charge, because the man he was with had confessed to 2 murders, so Mark turned himself in before police had a chance to arrest him. While being interviewed by police, he said he didn't know much about David, but he'd seen him from living a few doors away, and he just had it in his mind that he wanted to kill someone that day as he was really angry.
It was just the wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, wrong neighbour. It had nothing to do with anything else. David was also known for being a man of routines, but if Mark had been watching him, he probably would have known around what time he would have been pulling into the garage and things like that. So Mark's recounts of events from that night was that David pulled into his garage, and shortly after, around 6 p.m, Mark knocked on David's door and asked him if he knew of any accommodation around. David invited him in to talk about it, as he often tried to help people, and they went into the living room. When David turned and walked away from Mark to get him a drink, Mark took the crystal decanter and hit David on the back of the head with it. David immediately dropped to the ground, and Mark continued hitting him about 10 times. Mark then found the hacksaw and a hammer, as well as a few knives in the kitchen, cutting through David's stomach and then cutting off his head and his hands. He used the cut-off bloody hand to draw the satanic drawings and writing, as we knew. Mark said he looked at the body for a while, watching what he'd done, and then put David's head in the sink, took off the gloves he was wearing, and washed himself, saying that there was blood on his face and he wanted to wash off. But then he calmly walked out of the house like nothing had happened. Mark spent 90 minutes mutilating, dismembering, and rearranging David's body.
It's like he was enjoying it.
Mark told police what had made him angry enough to murder David was that he had made sexual advances towards him and attempted to proposition him. He said David had pulled his pants down and put a pornographic video on as a prelude to sex, but police only found a documentary on Queen Elizabeth II in his video player.
Depends what kind of porn you're into.
Mark told police what had made him angry enough to murder David was that he had made sexual advances towards him and attempted to proposition him. He said David had pulled his pants down and put a pornographic video on as a prelude to sex, but police only found a documentary on Queen Elizabeth II in his video player, and forensics confirmed that David's pants were up when the attack began and pulled down after, as stab wounds in his leg matched up with holes and blood in his pants while they were up. Then talking about murdering Frank, he said he knew Frank was a convicted pedophile and wanted to kill him because he didn't like him. Mark said he called him up, pretending to be gay, told him his name was John and that he wanted to go to his house. Frank said yes and invited him over. Mark pretended to be sexually attracted to Frank, so Frank took him out into the back granny flat. When Frank turned his back to Mark rammed him into the wall. Frank fell to the ground and then Mark gave him a few kicks while wearing the hard Colorado boots. I was watching the documentary and the police were taking Mark throughout Frank's granny flat and he was trying to remember the order in which the attack on Frank occurred. And he goes, "Oh, fucking hell," while trying to remember. And then he goes, "Oh, pardon my language," to the police officers. Police found him extremely polite and a gentle person the whole time. So after kicking Frank, he grabbed the cord of the lamp, wrapped it around Frank's head to strangle him, and then started hitting him on the head with the lamp while it was wrapped around his neck, and he thought it was 40 plus times. He then took off the bloody boots as to not be seen leaving the house with bloody boots on, and walked through Frank's main house, changing into a pair of Frank's pants to wear out.
But shouldn't he leave David's house all bloody?
Yeah, he left David's house all bloody, walked to his own house 3 doors up. This one happened at 3 o'clock in the morning, that one happened at 6 o'clock at night. That would have still been light outside. He then showed where he got the tie-pins from in Frank's wardrobe and said he went back to Frank after finding the tie-pins, putting them into his cheek and eyes. Mark repeatedly said he thought someone should have killed Frank and he didn't like him. He said that Frank was a, quote, very, very horrible man, but that David's murder was just random. He wasn't even sure if he was a homosexual or not and wasn't fueled by that at all.
So poor generous David was just innocent victim.
Yeah, just Mark was having a bad day. So Mark was no longer living with Keith and going between his father Jack Van Krevel's home and a hostel in Wollongong, so they searched both properties. In Jack's home, they found the missing tracksuit top, matching the tracksuit pants that were found bloodied at Frank's home, as well as the pants that belonged to Frank that Mark took to wear leaving the crime scene. Then in the hostel, there was a gold chain belonging to David and a book titled The A to Z of Serial Killers. Mark used this book as a type of diary to write his future plans of murder in. It had Frank Arkell and David O'Hearn's name in it, saying, "The first one is the best. You always remember your first. Who's next?" And on the following page, there was a list titled, "My list. Special members are only thought of. Who will be my number 3? The possibilities are endless, including," and then a list of people he knew, including his sister Belinda Van Krevel and his father Jack. And there were also like crucifixes and stuff scribbled on pages and other type of satanic symbols. But on several pages it just had written who will be number 3.
So he was going to go for his own family, or and did his brother David not take any part in this? Was it David?
Keith is not found to have had anything to do with any of this.
He was just chop up fish.
He was just working. So at trial, Mark claimed manslaughter, claiming that he'd been sexually abused as a child by his father Jack, and that David pulled down his own pants and invited Mark to take part in a sexual act, which supposedly had Mark flashing back to similar acts his father had done to him as a child, thus making him lose control and start hitting David. He was kind of using the gay panic defense that we talked about in the Jenny Jones show one as well.
Yes, but how does his father alive that he's used his father?
Yep, his father will testify. Mark's defense lawyer said both men were killed because they wanted sex with Mark, and blamed Mark's interest in Satanism and the 10-year history of physical and sexual abuse at the hands of his father. But as I said, the forensic evidence had already ruled out the claims Mark was making against David. Jack also denied any sexual abuse claims. He got up in the stand and said he'd been too tough on Mark and had previously physically abused him, but he completely denied having ever touched any of his children in a sexual manner. Jack's brother Tony said he could never imagine his brother being physically abusive, especially not sexually abusive, and believed Jack only said he was physically abusive in court in an attempt to diminish Mark's responsibilities for his actions. He didn't even believe that. He just thought Jack was trying to be a good dad.
Stick up for his son.
Yeah, somewhat, like, kind of put a bit of blame on himself so his son got less jail time. And there was also evidence from their childhood that Jack used to overindulge his kids, buying Mark and his sister Belinda bikes when they expressed having interest in motocross, the best protective equipment, and he even bought himself a bike so that he could be with them and participate in something his children enjoyed. The judge agreed and rejected Mark's plea of provocation and diminished responsibility and completely rejected the sexual abuse allegations. So that was thrown out by the judge, refused that. Mark received 2 consecutive life sentences for the murders, but there were issues within the family after the court case, particularly with the family not being happy about the long sentence. So Mark and Belinda's mother, Elizabeth Carroll, had left the family when they were only 2 and 3. So she had nothing to do with them, not really having a relationship with either of her children after that.
Do they not know they were on the list? I presume that would come up in court.
No, yeah, they definitely both knew that they were on the list.
You won't be fighting in for a linear sentence for your brother or son that's after mauling
2 and having you on a list. I couldn't find any further evidence, so I didn't want to put it in without having, like, thorough proof. But apparently Jack had been in, like, parenting courses and stuff from when the kids were young, because he was a single dad, and he'd put in all this effort trying to be the best father he could be, going to courses and stuff to learn how to be the best parent. So I'd say just he was a single dad trying to do the best by his kid, and even though he could see his kid maybe had some issues, he still wanted him to have a life. I'm not sure. Look, if there was someone with me on a murder list, I wouldn't be doing anything to try and get them leniency.
No, we're looking for the death sentence.
Well, yeah. But Elizabeth then left the courtroom distraught, screaming for the reporters and the cameras to capture, "I'll get you, Jack, I'll get you," in response to the allegations of Jack sexually abusing their child, which was rejected by police, the judge, and the jury. Anyway, Belinda also did an interview claiming her father drove Mark to commit the crimes and that Jack's the one who should be in jail, not her brother. Also, to note, in an initial interview with police, Belinda had said it was scary that her name was on her brother's list, right? As a reasonable response. And how scary it was that she could have been next. But in a later interview with 60 Minutes, she was asked if she was scared of her brother, and she asks why would she be scared, and reiterates her love for him and how they love each other, and that she was never scared of being on that list because she knows her brother would never hurt her.
Okay, that's a bit weird out of her sister.
Yeah, it is.
Like, just because Mark was just nice, polite fella, and even when he left the police into his apartment from day one, like, and apologised for cursing at the crime scene.
Yeah.
He definitely has another dark side.
If my brother had committed brutal crimes like that and then had me in a book who's number 3, will it be Rosie? Death sentence.
Yeah, you'll be thinking, but yeah, shut up.
So 2 weeks after Mark's trial, Jack was found dead in his Albion Park home. He too, like the other victims, had been brutally murdered, stabbed with numerous items, and mutilated. But Mark was in prison.
Oh. Belinda, what have you been at? Is Mark covering up for his sister? Come on, let's get into the gruesome bit.
So, Belinda lived with Jack and with her daughter Tia. So I believe Belinda was 18 at this time, who was luckily sleeping in Belinda's bedroom with her this night. Belinda said she heard noises throughout the night of someone in her home and attacking her father, but she was too scared for her and her daughter's safety to do anything until after she heard the attacker leave the home. She then grabbed Tia and saw pools of blood coming from her father's bedroom, but refused to check, driving to Warilla station to speak to police. Police found Jack, who was knelt beside the bed in his bedroom with his chest lying on the bed and his arms beside his torso. He was unclothed, with severe trauma sustained to his back and his head, and there were also large amounts of blood on the bed sheets and some cast-off blood on the curtains and wall. A hatchet, a knife, and a fire poker were laying beside his body, all side by side. The poker was from a matching set that he had in his home. The knife was similar to the set Jack already had, so this again appeared to be an attack done with items found in the house, but Mark had been in prison the entire time. The killer had left blood footprints from their boots throughout the house, so police were able to match the shoes. These prints led to Tia's bedroom window, where the killer appeared to have left from. This was also the only window in the house without a fly screen. Belinda recalled the night saying she was woken by the noises of her dad being stabbed and calling out, but she tried to keep her daughter quiet while hiding them both under the blanket to hide. She said her bedroom door opened and she thought she was going to die. There were blood smears on her door handle proving the killer had opened the door, but then the door closed again. She was scared and after a while left with her daughter, seeing the blood and not wanting to look in her dad's room, just wanting to get out with her daughter, and then drove to the police station. In her police interview, Belinda discussed Mark's crimes, saying that she doesn't want to get him in trouble, but that she's always had her suspicions about those 2 killings, and now this happening. She then said she didn't know who killed her father, but it appeared like Belinda was indicating that Mark had orchestrated his father's killing from jail. Plus, Jack's name was written in his book of who could be number 3. So she was encouraging the notion that Mark despised their father, and it appeared like Mark wanted to make sure his father died after the trial. So police visited Mark in jail to see if he had orchestrated the father's murder. Mark showed no remorse or sorrow for what had occurred to his father, but wanted police to tell him exactly what happened in detail, like he had more of a fascination than any concern.
He wants to know who his copycat murderer
did it, Mark, since he had gone.
Good.
So, there also had not been many visitors seeing Mark since he had gone to jail, but his housemate Keith was one that had. Mark and Keith had grown up together and were best friends. In previous interviews with Jack, it was clear Jack didn't think well of Keith and didn't like Mark spending so much time with Keith and saw Keith as a bad influence. Police asked Belinda who she thinks Mark would have organised their Police asked Belinda who she thinks Mark would have had organise their father's murder, and she denied knowing. Then she mentioned Keith's name, but said Keith's apparently gutless, so she couldn't believe it would be him. But again, Keith became the main suspect in a murder investigation. One of the last people to see Keith was Belinda, and now they couldn't find him anywhere since the murder. She agreed that she'd travelled with Keith to Silverwater Jail to visit Mark. However, plans fell through as Belinda hadn't organised the visit with police, so she spent more time travelling between Silverwater Jail and Wollongong with Keith and didn't see Mark at all. But Belinda was basically denying having any further relationship with Keith than it being one of her brother's friends. Belinda said that while they were travelling, Keith told her that he was now homeless and living under a bridge using some tin as shelter. She said she knew nothing more. Luckily, Keith ended up being spotted at Albion Park train station and arrested by police for interviewing and DNA. His shoes were taken immediately and were a match for the ones found through Jack's home in blood. Keith admitted to the murder, saying he was depressed and angry that Jack should pay for what he's done to Mark. Police walked him around Jack's home for Keith to tell them exactly what happened that night. He apparently knew exactly where to find the axe in the backyard as he'd spent so much time there. So he picked up the axe or hatchet from outside and found Tia's bedroom window slightly open, so that was how he entered their home, going straight for Jack's bedroom, but had somehow also gotten a knife from the kitchen. So he went directly from Tia's window into Jack's bedroom, but had a knife and a hatchet, both from the house.
But he got the hatchet from the garage.
The hatchet was from outside the house. The knife was supposed to be from the kitchen. Keith said Jack was asleep, so he kicked the furniture around his bed to wake him up and then began attacking him with the axe. This was when Belinda could hear Jack trying to get away from his attacker, but too scared to intervene. Keith then stabbed Jack with the kitchen knife and said to Jack that this was for Mark, called him a pedophile and told him he'd never molest another kid again. He left to get a fire poker from the living room and returned, turning on the light so that Jack could see who was attacking him. Jack then called Keith by name, but Keith just repeatedly stabbed Jack with the poker. He said he did this to kill him and ran out, opening Belinda's door and then closing it, not planning on hurting anyone else. Police asked him to show them where he got the weapons from, and when police asked him to show where he got the knife from, Keith began looking through kitchen drawers, saying, like in a drawer. But he clearly couldn't find where the knives were kept and couldn't tell police where he found that knife.
So was he given that knife inside the house?
Was he given that knife inside the house? You're very good at this game.
It's not a game, it's just fun. It sounds... I don't know. Belinda, I didn't trust her enough, but with Tia as well. So.
I think she's only like 3. So Keith's argument was that it was a direct result of Jack's sexual abuse. Belinda told police that she wasn't sad as yet, but it will happen. Police then started to put together a few issues with the story. Belinda was in bed with Tia and a mobile phone nearby.
I was going to ask that, but ago. I just went back to about 20 odd years ago.
There were mobile phones.
Mobile phones were out then.
Yeah.
People not.
And she never attempted to use it to make contact with police. She also drove all the way to Warilla Station from Albion Park to make the report to police, when Albion Park has its own police station 5 minutes away from their home. Police attempted to understand if perhaps Belinda was too traumatized to think clearly, but it did appear as if she was trying to give someone time to escape. This was when they found out that Keith was more than just Belinda's brother's friend. Keith was also romantically involved with Belinda. When Keith was interviewed, he said it was irrelevant but correct, while Belinda just kept asking how her sex life had anything to do with police or their investigation on who murdered her father. It turned out that the day before Jack's murder, Belinda and Keith had spent several hours together, with Belinda making comments about things that Jack had done to her, Mark, and Tia that were abusive, trying to indicate that they were all being sexually abused. Keith said Jack molested them, and now Tia's saying weird things, implying she's now getting sexually abused. He said he knew Belinda wanted her dad dead. 8 months later, Keith's serving 12 years in prison for the murder, and Elizabeth, Belinda and Mark's mum, makes a report to police that she had called Jack 3 days before his murder because she'd heard that Belinda put out a $2,000 contract on Jack's life and Keith had accepted to kill him. She encouraged Jack to call the police, but he wouldn't call the police on his own daughter. Belinda was questioned and denied all allegations and said she'd never paid anyone money to kill her dad. However, police executed a search warrant and found several money orders deposited into Keith's jail account, all around $200 at a time.
I suppose Keith was down his luck. He was living under a bridge, so 2,000 would get a person
in jail. What are you going to get in jail?
Well, you get your accommodation, dinners, meal, roof overhead.
Yeah, and then he's in for 12 years, and all that time he has $2,000 to pay for everything he wants in there.
Do you not pay your prisoners over to be in jail?
Do you pay your prisoners here to be in jail?
They do. They get paid.
Your prisoners get paid?
You get a allowance, yeah. It might be not much, but...
Stop it.
You pay her to be in jail.
They also found letters from Keith stating he should have bought a radio with that money, but he bought a kettle and tobacco, leaving police to question why she would be sending the person that killed her father money and keeping letters explaining how his life is going. They then found her letters to him stating how much they both trust and care about each other. One said, quote, "You've done more for me than anyone could make up they've done. I'll always look up to you and no one could come anywhere near as close to me as you are." That was from Belinda to Keith. Belinda argued it not being strange and said she's still friends with him and talks to him every day on the phone. She said they're good friends but not dating and there's no sexual relationship. Obviously, he's in prison.
Jail.
She later admitted to having been in a physical relationship with Keith, though. However, the letters and money orders were evidence that Belinda had direct involvement in Jack's murder, and police believed that she used her relationship with Keith to manipulate him into committing the murder. She told police Keith didn't have to carry out her wishes, but he chose to do that. Belinda then claimed that she too was sexually abused by her father and that he deserved this, even though Mark's claims of sexual abuse were rejected in trial, and Jack's family and friends continue to argue that he wouldn't be capable of something like that. Not to say he definitely didn't, because, he's dead. He couldn't stand trial and he denied doing it, but he didn't have his own trial where his accusations were proven.
He wouldn't have came up in trial for it unless if marketing got caught for his murders.
Exactly. That too.
There was no previous cases that these kids brought up against him of sexual violence or
never been
physical violence.
No, never been brought up to any family members, friends, anything. No, none of this had ever been brought up to anyone. So in trial, a man Belinda had started seeing after Jack's death, his name was Scott, he testified against her. He told the court that when Belinda had found out of Elizabeth telling the police she'd orchestrated her father's murder, she drove Scott to Nowra, showing him exactly where her mother lived, and asked him to kill her. He said he initially agreed to kill her, but later stated he wasn't serious. Scott said Belinda told him how Keith killed her father with a fire poker, a knife, and a tomahawk. She explained having left the tomahawk on a wood pile for him, and the knife under the doona on her daughter's bed. He also testified to Belinda having told him she aborted Keith's baby 2 weeks after the murder because she couldn't have a baby to her father's killer. Belinda then threatened his safety if he spoke to police, threatening Scott, his brother, and his nan.
Where does Scott come from all of a sudden? I thought she was still pin-palling and had a thing for Keith, and they're divine love to each other.
Belinda has a lot of boyfriends.
Okay. Scott wasn't going to kill her mother.
No, Scott was not going to kill her mother, but he did say that he'd keep her sick. So that was why Keith couldn't find where the knives were, because they weren't kept in the kitchen.
She was setting up everything up for Keith.
She set up everything perfectly for Keith. And also why he went straight to Jack's bedroom, but somehow had a knife in the kitchen. Another ex that Belinda was seeing around the time of Jack's death. He testified that Belinda showed him Jack's bedroom, where the blood still was, and when Tia began crying for her Poppy, Belinda said to her child, "He's been fucking chopped up."
It's a bit harsh.
Yeah. So this is all testified, this isn't just stories that people are it could still be a story, but it's you're saying it under oath. So Belinda had pled guilty for soliciting Keith to have her father murdered in Wollongong Court and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. And she smiled as the sentence was handed down. The judge said there was no evidence of her being sorry for her actions. Belinda was released from prison in 2006 and told media that she just wanted to get on with her life. However...
Oh, yeah. Belinda hasn't stopped yet.
8 years later, her boyfriend Marshall Gould showed up to hospital with stab wounds, originally claiming to have been mugged. He refused to file charges, but hospital staff made a mandatory report to police, and it was found to be Belinda under the influence of alcohol and Valium. He told police he loved his girlfriend and didn't want anything to happen to her. Marshall wrote a letter to the judge begging for leniency and explaining why he loved her. She pled guilty to stabbing her partner 5 times in an attack in July 2013 and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But when she first met this boyfriend, it was 6 years prior to the attack, and she gave him a book called Bound by Blood, which is the true crime story about her family, based on the crimes committed by herself, her brother, and Keith. Who gifts someone that?
Who would actually still stay around after getting that book?
But also, it's being proud of your crimes. It just shows a lot of look, this is what my family's capable of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what I said. He was given a warning. He was given the book.
He was given the book 6 years prior. Not long after being released for stabbing Marshall, Belinda went to a cafe in Windang which is also that side of Wollongong, and stole an older lady's handbag from the table, claiming it was just sitting there like no one owned it. And she said it was a bad decision. She was sentenced to 15 months in prison. In 2022, she was charged again with attacking an 80-year-old pensioner and causing actual bodily harm. I'm not actually sure if she received jail time for that. It seemed like she got more jail time for stealing a handbag.
Stealing a handbag?
Yeah. I couldn't find anything on that actual court case. But regardless, she was out of prison for sure in March last year, 2023, because she pled guilty to stabbing another partner who was 56 in their Wollongong apartment. They were walking back to their apartment after getting a kebab, and she accused him of cheating on her with one of their neighbours, and things turned violent. She hit him in the face with a bottle, giving him a black eye instantly, while they were walking back. Then once inside the apartment, she got a knife and stabbed him in the back of his shoulder. He passed out. Once he regained consciousness, he tried making phone calls for help, but Belinda took the phone out of his hand. As he was laying on the bed, Belinda continued stabbing him in the back and shouting, "You can't get anyone better than me." He ended up being able to call emergency services and was found by police in a pool of his own blood. He went in for surgery and he did survive this.
But do any of these ex-boyfriends, do any of these not read the case that's going on
Before?
Are they just come out from under a stone or what?
I do wonder what kind of boyfriend she's dating, though. So for this, she was sentenced to 6 years in prison for stabbing him multiple times with a non-parole period of 4 years. So she'll be eligible for parole in 2027.
Oh, what's going to happen then? There'll be another podcast.
Her sentencing judge did address previous child abuse allegations supposedly made by her father again, such as him sexually abusing her brother and physically beating her so bad she would wet herself. He also addressed beating Mark so bad he was taken into hospital, and another instance where a gun was held to Mark's head, these both being witnessed by Belinda. They say this abuse left Belinda with post-traumatic stress disorder and borderline personality disorder. I mean, I know people with both that don't commit these crimes.
No, but she was, I suppose, look, the judge has been very lenient on her sentencing.
Plus, Jack was never found guilty of doing any of these things. That's where I find it quite crazy.
But look, Jack was in the wrong to
defend himself. So, Belinda ended up being dubbed Belinda Van Evil and Australia's most evil woman. She did an interview for 60 Minutes in which the interviewer said she could come across as a likeable woman, and then her eyes would suddenly go black and she realised it was a scary person capable of real evil. And that was one thing I noticed while watching the interview myself, that her eyes would just suddenly change, and it was actually quite scary even just like watching.
And who was she interviewed by?
It was
interviewed her.
No, it was an Australian reporter for 60 Minutes interviewed Belinda, and she asked about Belinda's brother, and someone asked Belinda, like, "Are you scared of your brother?" And her face just went, like, her eyes just went terrifying, and she was like, "Why would I be scared of my brother?"
Listen, if you think the brothers, I'd be scared of her. And is he still in prison?
The brother?
Mm.
Mark got 2 life sentences. He'll never be out.
I have to do all life sentences.
Yeah, there's no getting out of this one. No possibility of parole. So on Keith, though, Keith was granted parole in 2012, but sent back to prison 3 months later after not being able to follow the conditions of his parole and live a crime-free life. I'm unsure where he is now. There is literally no information of him online.
So there's a small what was this all lenience on female prisoners?
I genuinely don't know if she's just getting off lightly due to her having a diagnosis of borderline personality and PTSD, or if it's because she stabbed the boyfriend. She didn't kill him. She didn't aim to kill him. There was none of that. I don't know how.
Just going by the family background, like they're into their knives and their stabbings and mutilating and.
You're 100% correct. I genuinely have no. And then Keith follows through on what she's telling him to do. He gets 12 years. Fine. He did the murder. And then she gets like 6 and she was out in 4. Plus, she's always paroled. She always gets out on the earliest sentence. So I just wonder if she's like prime prison inmate
Like, she's going to be out now in a couple of years' time, and she can just do what she wants again.
Yeah.
If she's that psychotic, she should be just locked up in a mental ward or something.
But that's the thing, like, she's clearly not seen as being mentally unwell enough to be locked away or put in a group home or something like that.
She's not someone you want to wander around the streets either.
But no, that's the thing. She's clearly not capable of living in society.
Ah, it was interesting.
That's everything I know on the Van Krevels, Valeras, the whole shebang.
Well, thank you, Rosie. That was very interesting. Thank you for inviting me onto this podcast.
Thanks for listening. You're a very good guest.
It was easy to be a guest.
Was it nice?
It was nice.
Sit there and listen to a story?
Cool story.
Not a cool story, a brutal story.
Gruesome.
Gruesome. Thank you. You gotta say goodbye.
Goodbye, folks. Until next time.
See ya.